There was a season, perhaps you've known one, in which I came to suspect that heaven had fallen into silence. Not the gentle musical silence of snow, but a crushing, hollow kind, like standing at the edge of a deep canyon and calling out only to hear your voice swallowed by wind and stone. I had prayed not carelessly or casually, but with the sincerity of a man who has run out of ideas and options. These were not the structured, dignified prayers of a Sunday pew. They were prayers cracked open by desperation, whispered into the dark with a trembling sort of hope. Hope that there was someone on the other end who still listened. And yet nothing came. The silence lingered, not for a moment, but for what felt like ages, until I began to wonder whether the silence itself was the answer. I had done, to my best understanding, all the right things. I believed not with naive certainty, but with the grit of experience. I worshipped. I waited. I gave thanks when I could muster it, and clung to hope when I could not. But the door remained shut. And not just shut, mind you, sealed, locked as though heaven had drawn its curtains and left the soul to knock alone. There are few trials more exhausting than doing everything in your power and still hearing nothing in return. And yet, I tell you truly, this was not a punishment. It was an invitation to a deeper kind of faith, one that does not hinge on answers but on trust, not on outcomes but on the one who holds them. It is a painful discovery, this truth, that God is not in a hurry. We are creatures of urgency, clinging to calendars and milestones, always measuring our lives in results and deadlines. But God, I am convinced, does not own a clock. Eternity does not tick. The Almighty moves at the pace of wisdom, not of want. His delays are not denials, though they often feel like it. Rather, they are instruments, chisels and fire, forming in us a vessel strong enough to carry what He plans to give. We speak of waiting as if it were a passive thing, but the truth is, waiting is work. Spiritual work. It stretches us, strips us, tests our affections, and exposes the difference between belief in God's gifts and belief in God Himself. In that long, unlit corridor between prayer and response, many temptations come. The enemy, clever, persistent, and merciless, will not miss an opportunity to whisper lies. You have been forgotten, he says. Others are chosen, but not you. Your prayers are echoes lost in heaven's chambers. These are not just lies. They are slander against the very nature of God. And yet they often feel true in the silence. This is why it is so dangerous. The heart, when it waits too long, begins to measure worth by results, and God's goodness by speed. But heaven does not rush, because it is not late. It waits because it is precise. There came a moment somewhere in the middle of this dry season when I stumbled once again upon that old passage from Habakkuk. For the vision awaits an appointed time. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. I had read it before dozens of times, in fact, but now it struck me differently. Perhaps it is not that we read Scripture, but that sometimes it chooses to read us. I realized that my discontent had not come from lack of faith in God's power, but from a subtle belief that He must operate according to my timing. What arrogance it is to imagine that the infinite should conform to the finite. What foolishness to think. I know better than the one who stitched together time itself. In hindsight, that great teacher of slow lessons, I can now say that it was in the waiting, not the answering, that my soul grew. Had the answers arrived on my schedule, I might have missed the transformation they were meant to bring. For it is not the open door that forms us, but the long hours standing before it, learning to knock without bitterness. We do not become mature by having our desires fulfilled. We become mature by learning to love the giver more than the gift. Waiting, then, is not an obstacle to God's plan. It is God's plan, or at least a vital part of it. It is the furnace where hurried faith is forged into holy endurance. So if you find yourself today in that quiet valley, knocking, praying, wondering, take heart. You are not abandoned. You are being shaped. Do not let the silence convince you of things the Scriptures do not say. Do not let delay deceive you into despair. One day, perhaps far from now, the door will open, the prayer will be answered, And you will discover that you were not waiting on the blessing. The blessing was waiting on you to become ready. And when that day comes, you will not resent the silence. You will thank it. We are by nature terribly impatient. It is not a flaw in the mechanical sense, but more so a side effect of being mortal. We live on a tightrope stretched between birth and death and time. To us is a dwindling currency. We spend it as one spends gold in a famine, hurriedly, anxiously, often foolishly. And so when the God of eternity tells us to wait, it feels less like a summons to trust and more like a sentence to endure. But if we are to understand the mind of God, or rather accept how far beyond our minds his thoughts must be, we must first surrender our obsession with speed. God is never in a hurry, because he is never in danger of running out of time. He created it, after all, and he did not give it to us as a whip, but as a rhythm. It is we who turned it into a race. Our deadlines are not heaven's concern. Our clocks do not govern the throne of grace. I once thought that delay was the mark of divine hesitation, as though God were still weighing my worthiness behind closed doors. But it occurred to me rather painfully that perhaps it was not heaven's decision that was still forming, but my soul. It is an unsettling thought, isn't it? That the gift may be ready long before the receiver is. That the table may be set and the feast prepared, but the guest must yet learn how to sit. There are certain fruits, I'm told, that cannot be harvested early. If plucked before their time, they are not only sour, but poisonous. It is the sun and the slow turning of seasons that make them sweet, and so it is with the promises of God. Some things are too holy to rush. To receive them prematurely is to mishandle them, and to mishandle them is often to be harmed by them. I've met people, as perhaps you have, who were crushed, not by the absence of blessing, but by its weight. They were given platforms before they had character, influence before they had roots, answers before they had asked the right questions. And like trees whose branches grow faster than their trunks, they collapsed in on themselves, top-heavy with favor and thin on substance. God in his mercy withholds from us not only punishment but premature reward. This is why he waits. Not because he is cruel, but because he is precise. Not because he has forgotten, but because he has measured the moment and found it wanting. There is something God is doing in the waiting, not just in the world around you, but in the world within you. The delay is not a defect in the plan. It is the plan. You see, God is not merely interested in giving us what we ask for. He is far more committed to making us into the kind of people who can carry what we ask for. What good is a promise if it breaks the vessel meant to hold it? What use is an answer if it undoes the one who receives it? To demand God's timing, conform to our own, is like asking the gardener to rip open the seed before it sprouts. It is not only foolish, but fatal to the process. There is a peculiar temptation that comes when we feel delayed. We believe ourselves forgotten. We look sideways and see others moving forward, marrying, bearing children, publishing books, receiving applause, and something bitter curls in our chest. We wonder, not in malice, but in sadness, has God passed me by? But this too is a deception. Our lives are not parallel tracks running the same race at different speeds. They are handcrafted stories penned by the same author, but told in different chapters with different cadences and climaxes. You are not behind. You are being authored with painstaking care. I am convinced now more than ever that God's slowness is never sluggishness, but rather a kind of divine craftsmanship. He is not delaying to torment us. He is shaping, trimming, forging, stretching, preparing the canvas before revealing the color. And when the moment is ripe, when all pieces fall into their ordained places, he will act. Not with reluctance, but with the force of inevitability. And when he does, there will be no mistaking his hand in it. It will be as Isaiah once thundered, "When the time is right, I, the Lord, will make it happen." Not you striving, not fate stumbling, not luck creeping in, but God deliberate, decisive, and unmistakable. And so let us not curse the delay. Let us not call it barren, what God calls sacred. The waiting is not empty. It is Eden before the dawn. It is the page before the ink. It is the womb of the blessing, not the grave of your prayers. You are not waiting for nothing. You are waiting for Him, and He is worth the wait. There is in each of us a subtle assumption, barely spoken, yet deeply seated, that if God has not yet granted our request, it must be because we have failed some hidden test. We assume delay is a verdict, a cosmic not good enough handed down from a silent heaven. But I have come to believe something quite different, that delay may in fact be a kindness precisely because we are not yet who we need to be to hold the weight of the answer. Being unready is not a flaw. It is a stage, and in God's economy, it is holy. There are few things more dangerous than a gift given too soon. A flame handed to a child may illuminate or destroy. So too is divine blessing without preparation. You ask for a platform, but can your humility bear applause? You ask for clarity, but can your spirit accept correction? You ask for love, but have you been taught yet how not to make an idol of it? I recall a time in my own life when I pleaded with God to open a particular door. I was convinced that what lay behind it was not only good but necessary for my calling, for my happiness, for my spiritual fulfillment. And yet the door would not move. I pounded upon it with prayer, with fasting, with tears. Still silence. Years later, not months, but years, the door finally opened. And what I found behind it was not just the opportunity I once longed for, but a mirror. I saw myself older perhaps, but more than that, I saw a soul that had been formed. Had that door opened earlier, it would have crushed me. Not because it was evil, but because I had not yet been strengthened to carry its good. We often think the gift proves the love of God, but sometimes it is the restraint that speaks even louder. Imagine a sculptor who hands his chisel to a student too soon, or a captain who gives the wheel to one who has never weathered a storm. No love waits, love watches, love prepares. God is not stingy. He is surgical. What He withholds, He does so with intention. It is not punishment, but protection. It is not reluctance, but refinement. And so I now try, however feebly, to thank Him not only for what He gives, but for what He does not. For every road He closed, every not yet that saved me from my own immaturity, my own impatience, my own pride. But this kind of thanksgiving only comes from trust, and trust, I'm afraid, cannot be microwaved. It is built inch by inch in the darkness of delay. When you are not chosen, when you are not recognized, when the world moves on without you, that is when you must decide whether you believe God's hand is still on you. That is where the roots grow deep. And here, if I may be so bold, is one of the cruelest temptations in the waiting to mistake visibility for value. We assume that because others are seen, they are called. Because they are advancing, they are blessed. But speed is not the same as substance. And God does not call you to pace, but to purpose. Your hiddenness is not a sentence. It is a sanctuary. You are not buried. You are planted. I find myself wondering now more than ever, not what God will give me, but what kind of person I must become to carry whatever it is. What kind of soul does not collapse under glory? What kind of heart can be trusted with influence? What kind of character can steward power and remain meek? These are the questions that matter far more than when will it happen or why hasn't it come. And so if you find yourself feeling unready, rejoice, for the awareness of your unreadiness may be the very proof that God is preparing you. He is not waiting for your perfection. He is waiting for your surrender. The readiness He seeks is not mastery but maturity, not confidence but dependence. One day, perhaps not far from now, you will look back and realize that the waiting did not withhold your calling, it constructed it. You were not stalled, you were being built. And when the time comes, as it surely will, you will carry what once would have crushed you. And you will give thanks not only for the gift, but for the gift of being unready. There is a peculiar ache that settles in the heart when you witness others receiving what you've long prayed for. It is not the bitterness of envy exactly, at least not in its most vulgar form. It is something more refined, more painful. It is the sorrow of hope deferred made heavier by the sight of someone else's hope fulfilled. You watch the engagement announcement, the job promotion, the testimony of healing, the long-awaited breakthrough, and though your lips may form a smile, something inside you whispers a quiet question. Why not me, Lord? Not in accusation, but in aching curiosity. Not because you begrudge their joy, but because you can no longer remember the last time joy knocked at your own door. There are few trials more subtle and spiritually disorienting than celebrating another's answered prayer while holding the silence of your own. It is a test, not of civility, but of character, not of politeness, but of trust. Comparison is, I think, one of the enemy's most artful tools. He does not come to steal your faith outright. He simply hands you a measuring stick and watches as you use it to strangle your own soul. He convinces you that God's generosity is limited, that His goodness is being distributed according to merit, and that your lack is evidence of divine disfavor. But this is not the way of the kingdom. God is not a factory distributing identical blessings on a conveyor belt. He is a gardener, meticulous, intentional, and impossibly patient. Each soul is its own soil, each life its own season, and what He plants in one He may prune in another. To compare is to misunderstand the very nature of divine love. It is not scaled or scheduled, it is sculpted. And here lies the deeper danger, that in watching others receive, you begin to rewrite your theology of who God is. You do not merely compare lives, you compare gods. Theirs, it seems, is active, attentive, timely. Yours distant and slow. But this is a distortion born of bruised perception. The God who answered them is the same, one who is shaping you. Their blessing is not your loss. Their harvest is not your famine. Their spring is not your winter's fault. It has helped me to remember that much of what we witness in others is the visible fruit of invisible seasons. You see the tree in bloom, but not the years it spent, breaking through the soil, the roots it put down in unseen darkness. You see the joy, but not the long nights. The confessions whispered in private, the prayers that came back unanswered until they didn't. To mature in faith is to rejoice with those who rejoice, not because it is easy, but because it is holy. To say amen to another's miracle, even as your hands are still empty. To trust that heaven has not forgotten your name, just because it is calling someone else's. This is no small feat. It requires a soul unshaken by shifting timelines. It demands a heart anchored, not in timing but in truth. For the true mark of spiritual confidence is not speed but steadiness. It is to bless what God is doing elsewhere, even while you wait for Him to do it here. It is to look upon another's open door and not resent it, but remember that the one who opened it also holds the key to yours. And if He has not yet turned it, it is not because He has lost interest, but because He has not lost sight of you. We must remember, too, that some blessings are burdens in disguise and some delays are mercies that cannot yet be explained. There is a kind of protection in being kept back, though it rarely feels like it at the time. Only later, with the distance that perspective provides, do we look back and realize, had I walked through that door, then it would have undone me. And so we give thanks retroactively for the doors that remained closed. When another's joy triggers your longing, do not rush to shame yourself. Let it be a prompt to speak honestly with God. Bring Him your questions, your weariness. He is not offended by honest pain. He is not embarrassed by your tears. He is, after all, the one who numbers them. And when the temptation comes, as it will, to compare paths, stop and remember, this you are not behind. You are becoming, you are not delayed. You are being designed. And when your time comes, as surely it will, no one else's blessing will have taken your place. There is room in the kingdom for all manner of goodness, and none of it has run out. So bless the ones who are dancing, even as you are still learning the tune. Clap for the miracle you are still waiting to see. You are not forgotten. You are not cast aside. You are even now being held, not back but close. We often imagine that God is writing our lives as stories with climaxes, twists, and satisfying resolutions. This is not untrue, but it is incomplete. For God is not merely a narrator. He is a sculptor, and He is less interested in the drama of our timeline than in the depth of our transformation. He is above all not writing a tale to be admired, but forming a soul that can endure. This is why the work of God, for all its brilliance, is so often unbearably slow. Because souls, unlike stories, cannot be rushed. They must be formed, not forced. Grown, not grabbed. And so what feels to us like delay is more often than not design the long and deliberate shaping of a heart until it can carry the eternal without crumbling beneath its weight. I confess, this has not always been a comforting thought. There were times in my life, long, aching stretches of time where I would have traded formation for progress, maturity for movement, and character for closure. I wanted answers, not growth. I wanted the page to turn, not the roots to deepen. But God, who is far wiser and far less sentimental than we, does not build with our impatience. He builds with pressure, time, silence, and fire. And what emerges from such work is not a polished life, but a fortified soul. There is a strange and hidden glory in this slow work. It is rarely noticed by others. It does not earn applause or gather followers. You may not even recognize it in yourself until much later. But over time, you begin to notice a new kind of strength. Not the strength to impress, but the strength to remain. The strength to trust when nothing moves. The strength to love when prayers go unanswered. The strength to kneel, not because you feel full, but because you know He is still God when you feel empty. And here is the irony: we often think we are waiting on the next thing to happen. A promotion, a healing, a relationship, a breakthrough. But more often we are not waiting on a moment. We are becoming a vessel. We are waiting until the walls of the soul are thick enough to hold the weight of the glory without cracking under the pressure. For what use is a miracle if it shatters the man who receives it? What good is a calling if the character cannot bear it? The Lord in His mercy refuses to give us gifts that will destroy us, and so He slows the story to build the soul. This is not a gentle process. There is breaking involved of pride, of illusion, of self-will. There is undoing. There are seasons where the soul must be stripped bare before it can be reclothed in the humility and holiness required for what lies ahead. But what God strips, He intends to replace. What He breaks, He intends to rebuild. The Apostle James writes, "Let endurance have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." This is not perfection as flawlessness, but perfection as wholeness. That kind of soul does not come from answered prayers alone. It comes from sitting with God long enough for His silence to teach you something that words never could. I think now of trees. The tallest among them are not the ones that grew the fastest, but those whose roots were forced to stretch deep beneath the soil to survive wind, drought, and winter. They are stable, not because of what is seen, but because of what lies beneath, invisible, unglamorous, slow. So it is with you. Your roots are growing. Even if you cannot feel them stretching, even if the soil feels hard and dry, the work is being done. You are not being punished. You are being planted, and the deeper the root, the greater the fruit. I no longer ask God to hasten my story. I ask Him to deepen it, for the soul that is deep can survive. Storms can bear fruit in famine, and can carry joy without vanity and sorrow without despair. So if you are in that slow season, the quiet one, the one with no visible progress, do not be fooled. Something sacred is happening beneath the surface. The carpenter is still at work. The potter still turns the wheel. The gardener still tends the soil. And when the time is right, and only then, what he has formed in secret will be revealed in strength. You will not be fragile. You will not be hollow. You will be ready. We do not easily call delays sacred. To us, delay feels like disappointment, dressed in polite silence. It frustrates our plans, stretches our patience, and awakens that primal fear that perhaps we've been forgotten. And yet if we peer more closely, if we press our ear to the stillness and dare to listen, we may hear something else entirely. Not divine absence, but divine restraint. To say that God withholds is not to accuse him of cruelty. Quite the opposite. It is to recognize a love so precise, so deeply committed to the long good of our soul, that he refuses to give merely for the sake of appeasement. He gives when giving will not destroy, and he withholds when waiting will heal. There is a passage in Isaiah 1 that once slipped past me like many others, until life made me sit still long enough to see it. It says, "Therefore the Lord waits to be gracious to you, and therefore he exalts himself to show mercy to you." Do you see it? The waiting of God is not hesitation. It is preparation for mercy. It is not the withholding of love, but its incubation. I find that deeply unsettling and deeply comforting. It suggests that God's silence is not passive. It is pregnant. Something is being formed both in the heavens and within us, and to rush it would be to rupture it. What the world calls delay, heaven calls design. Still, we are creatures of clocks. We measure value by speed. We interpret progress through visibility, and when time stretches, our theology begins to buckle. We question whether the God who spoke the cosmos into motion has somehow fallen asleep at the controls. But it is not so. The delays of God are neither accidents nor oversights. They are acts of restraint and acts of trust. For even God, in his own mysterious humility, seems to trust us with waiting. Imagine that the Almighty, all-knowing and ever-just, trusting your soul enough to grow beneath the burden of slowness, trusting that you might find something in the silence that noise could never teach, trusting that you might seek not only what he gives but who he is. In this way, delay becomes a sacred space, a sanctuary without walls where the soul is quieted, not by resolution but by revelation, the revelation that God is good, even when he is quiet, near, even when he is unseen, active, even when he appears still. If we are honest, we don't want to be in this space. We'd rather move forward, see results, feel something shift. But I have come to believe that heaven is not so interested in our momentum as it is in our maturity. Not every answered prayer is a blessing, and not every delay is a curse. Often they are reversed. The delay, it turns out, was the mercy, the unanswered prayer, the protection, the closed door, the preservation of a self that was not yet strong enough to pass through it intact. One day, in the vast and shining clarity of eternity, we may be shown all the things we begged for that would have broken us. And I suspect we will fall to our knees not only in gratitude for what he gave, but in trembling awe at what he wisely withheld. But in the meantime, in this holy meantime, we are invited to let the delay do its work, not simply to endure it, but to be formed by it. To stop asking, "When will it end?" and start asking, "What is it forming?" For waiting is not a pause in your purpose. It is the place where purpose is born. If you are in such a space now, hemmed in by God's timing, held back by heaven's silence, do not rush to escape it. You are not stuck. You are stationed. You are not overlooked. You are being observed with the utmost care. And what you call a delay, God may be calling a display of trust, of refinement, of readiness. So breathe. Breathe deeply, and rest in the knowledge that you are not late, nor is he. You are in the hands of a God who does not rush masterpieces, and when the time is right, as it always is, with him what he has prepared will come forth, not merely on schedule but with sacred precision. And you will find that the delay was not a detour, but the very path by which your soul was made whole. There are few things as disorienting to the soul as the silence of God, not the peaceful silence of sacred rest, but the long, hollow kind that echoes after prayer. We cry out, and there is no reply. We listen, and the heavens seem mute. It is not that we doubt his existence, not quite. It is that we doubt his attention. And perhaps at our most fragile, we begin to suspect something more painful still, that he hears but chooses not to speak. In those hours, one feels very small. The words we offer fall back upon us like waves retreating from a rocky shore. The verses we once quoted with ease begin to feel like borrowed garments, no longer fitting the shape of our ache. Even joy, which once bloomed at the simplest assurance, God is good now, wilts beneath the quiet weight of divine distance. But I have learned slowly, stubbornly, with many stumbles, that silence is not absence. That stillness is not inactivity. That quietness in the hands of God is not cruelty. It is crafting. It may be that God speaks most clearly when we stop trying to fill the void. For the noise of our own anxiety, our manufactured worship, our spiritual busyness, all these can crowd the frequency where his whisper resides. But once the heart exhausts itself, once the lips fall silent in fatigue rather than reverence, the soul becomes strangely receptive. The silence that felt like abandonment begins to feel like invitation, not to speak, but to be still, not to perform, but to receive. It is in this stillness, I believe, that God does his deepest work. Not in the dazzling light of vision or the rush of emotional fervor, but in the slow, subterranean work of becoming. What is formed in silence is often the most enduring. Roots, after all, grow in darkness, and the mightiest of trees do not thunder upward overnight. They stretch downward first, hidden and steady, until one day they break through the surface, not because they've rushed, but because they've endured. Perhaps the tragedy of modern faith is that we have come to measure God by his volume. We expect thunder spectacle, immediacy. But Scripture paints a different portrait. A God who met Elijah not in the wind, nor the earthquake, nor the fire, but in a still small voice. A God who came not with fanfare but in flesh, who waited in a womb for 9 quiet months, and then 30 silent years before uttering a single public word. What if God is not in a hurry because he is working with eternal things? And what if the reason you feel so little is not because he is doing nothing, but because what he is doing is too deep to yet detect? I believe the Spirit of God often works as water does beneath frozen ground, unseen, persistent, powerful. Just because you cannot feel the thaw does not mean the ice is not cracking. Just because you do not hear him does not mean he is not building. Sometimes the silence is not an absence of movement, but the very sound of construction. To walk by faith is to live forward without feedback. It is to keep walking when the map goes blank, to keep trusting when no voice answers. And if this sounds like suffering, it is sacred suffering. It is how Christ himself walked. My God, why have you forsaken me?" was not shouted by a man who had lost faith, but by the only man who ever had perfect faith, faith that held even in the absence of felt nearness. If silence was not beneath him, then neither should it be beneath us. So let us not despise the quiet days. Let us not mistake a lack of sensation for a lack of sanctification. God may be building in you the kind of strength that does not depend on signs. He may be deepening your roots to support a future you cannot yet see. He may be preparing your soul not for survival, but for stature. And when the silence finally lifts, as it always does, you will not emerge unchanged. You will be steadier, slower to fear, quicker to listen. You will carry peace as a native tongue, not a foreign phrase. And perhaps most precious of all, you will have learned to treasure his presence, not only when he speaks, but simply because he is there. There is a peculiar mercy in time, not the kind we grasp while walking forward through it, but the kind that appears when we turn to look behind us. The present often feels tangled, the future uncertain, but the past, especially once grace has passed through it, begins to reveal a strange and beautiful coherence. What was once bewildering becomes, in hindsight, breathtaking. I believe there will come a day for you, for me, for all who have walked the long and silent road of waiting, when it will make sense. Not all of it, perhaps. Some sorrows may always carry a shadow this side of heaven, but much that felt arbitrary will be revealed as ordered. The delays will be seen as design. The pauses will sing of purpose. It will not arrive with trumpets, this moment of clarity. No angelic spotlight will fall from the heavens. It will come quietly, as most divine things do, perhaps in a conversation, a journal entry, a sudden peace that settles like dew upon the soul. You will realize without fanfare that had things come sooner, you would not have been ready. That had the door opened on your schedule, you would have walked through it unprepared. And what you once saw as God's denial, you will now recognize as His devotion. There is a tapestry woven behind the veil of our days. On our side, it often looks like a mess, knots, threads, inconsistencies. But turn it over, and the pattern emerges. What you thought were delays were really the anchoring stitches. What you thought were detours were in fact essential design, and the pain you prayed away. It may have been the very tension that shaped the most resilient parts of you. When we ask God to act, we often imagine a straight-line prayer, then answer, ask, then receive. But God does not work in straight lines. He works in symphony. A crescendo here, a stillness there, a motif returning years later that we thought had vanished. And when the final movement plays, we will weep, not from sorrow but from awe, because it all fit, it all belonged, and He missed not a single beat. You will see it, perhaps not today, perhaps not even in this lifetime, but you will see it. And when you do, I suspect you will not just be grateful for the blessing, you will be grateful for the wait. You will thank Him not only for what arrived, but for how long it took, because it was in the waiting that you were changed. You were not standing still. You were being softened. You were not forgotten. You were being fortified. God was not late. He was loving you at a depth your schedule could not comprehend. And so if today still feels like silence, if the story still seems unfinished, hold on. One day, the very pages that made you tremble will be the ones that make you lift your hands in worship. The questions that once haunted you will give way to reverent wonder. Not every answer will come, but every doubt will meet its match in the face of Christ. And on that day, when the threads of time are gathered into the hands of the eternal weaver, you will see clearly, He was never slow, never absent, never unkind. His timing was and always will be perfect, and you were ready, not a moment too soon.